More evidence that life has de-evolved. Scientists claim bacteria evolved right in their lab, right in front of them. We make a bunch of bad puns and we dive into the mailbag. This is Genesis Week. And welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, answering your questions and questioning your answers. Proudly brought to you by the supporters of Core Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education, and now carried on the Christinema Network, Christian cinema at its finest. Excellence in Pirate Broadcasting. We took over the Brock Street Tunnel in Montreal to shoot this week's show so we can keep bringing you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear. And we continue to give glory to the Creator while doing it. The Bible does not say, test nothing, hold fast to what you want to believe. But rather, the Creator gave you a brain to reason. Remember, you can find us in cyberspace at Wazooloo.com, that's me, or GenesisWeek.com. And you can subscribe to my YouTube channel and get extras like Creo rants and full interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. The past couple of episodes of Genesis Week, we have cited multiple examples and answered viewer questions about how life is de-evolving. Well, once again, we come across another example in the science literature, published this past week in Cell magazine. Ferrier et al. Were searching the DNA of several organisms in an attempt to figure out the evolution of Hox and Parahox genes. Genes are sequences in your DNA that control how you are made. Now, you inherit your genes from your parents, so you'll inherit a lot of traits from your parents, and could possibly inherit diseases and disorders as well. But even if diarrhea runs in your family, it's not genetic, unless it runs in your genes. Yeah, it was really bad, wasn't it? You'll probably never be able to discuss genetics with a straight face again, huh? And some of you won't get that joke until 3 in the morning. Moving right along. Okay, so there are genes that dictate how your body is made, but Hox genes are actually switches, if you will, that control your genes. They're tasked with controlling the construction of the body of the creature or plant, and specifically what is constructed and where. It's the Hox genes that keep your head growing where it's supposed to, your legs and arms, your torso, etc. Now, it's very bad news if these Hox genes make a mistake. You can literally grow 2 heads or grow an eye on your foot, etc. Or the Hox genes could suppress the growth of parts, and thus you do not grow any arms or legs, etc. Now, some evolutionists have looked to Hox genes in hopes that it could help evolution. After all, some ancient critter could grow 6 legs instead of 4 because of a mistaken Hox gene. Generally speaking, though, Hox gene malfunctions do not produce diversity, they produce horrible malformities. Even if they cause an extra leg to grow somewhere where it's not supposed to grow, that is not new information. It is simply a mistake, putting information it already had in the wrong place. Still, other evolutionary thinkers have suggested that Hox genes support evolutionary theory because the Hox genes in different animals are homologous. Now, what is a homologue? Well, they would claim that your arm bones are similar to the bones in the front leg of a dog or many other animals. The bones are homologous. Now, this is used as an argument for evolution, in that if we all evolved from the same common ancestor, all the descendant animals would have similar structures. Now, there are huge problems with this argument. First of all, the genes that direct the construction of your arm are completely different genes than those that produce the front leg of a dog, for example. The genes aren't the same and come from completely different places in the DNA. Secondly, while one could interpret homology as evidence for a common ancestor, it can also be interpreted as evidence for a common designer. People who've seen my robots I've built over the years can recognize my designs. The robots didn't come from a common ancestor. They came from a common designer. That's why they have similarities. But the Hox genes are considered by some evolutionists to be homologs among animals. All animals have Hox genes, as well as humans, and often the same Hox gene controls the same development in different creatures. The PAX6 Hox gene, for example, seems related to the development of the eye in both humans and mice. However, many animals have fewer Hox genes. Thus, it was assumed that the higher organisms evolved new Hox genes somewhere along the line. Now then there are para-Hox genes, which are cousins of Hox genes. Para-Hox genes are an array of Hox genes. Ferrier et al., in their report in Cell magazine, went looking at many different organisms that are supposedly the oldest according to evolution. For example, they looked at the block of DNA containing the TROX2 para-Hox gene in humans. Now, much like a city block, they found the same kind of block of DNA in a critter called a placozoan, which is a small flat critter about 1 millimeter in diameter. The placozoan had the same block of DNA as the humans, except it was missing the Hox and para-Hox genes. It was like visiting a city which had an identical block to another city, but one house was missing from the block of the second city. You'd suspect that the two blocks were alike, but a house had been lost somewhere along the line in the second city block. Ferrier and team referred to these missing Hox genes as ghost genes. In other words, there's every reason to believe the Hox genes were once there, but somewhere along the way, the placozoans lost the gene. Now, while it is the exact opposite of what evolution needs, it was still called evolution. Now, one has to ask what their definition of evolution is, because the evidence fits exactly what creationary theorists would say. The placozoans were once more complex than they are now. They were created perfect and are deteriorating over time. Now, this evidence is the opposite of what evolution would expect, and yet lines up perfectly with a perfect creation living in a fallen world and thus deteriorating over time. I was pointed to an article in Nature magazine from a couple of weeks back as evidence of evolution observed in the lab. Now, E. coli is a bacteria that actually live in your intestine and help you digest your food. E. coli normally cannot eat a substance called citric acid while living in an area with lots of oxygen. However, as researchers Blount and Lenski conducted a long string of experiments with E. coli bacteria, they discovered that somewhere along the way in their experiment, some of their bacteria figured out how to digest citric acid even when in the presence of oxygen. The bacteria actually changed their genes in order to gain this capability. So, is this evolution? To answer this question, we're first going to watch Creo rant number 80, which dealt with a similar bacterial mutation known as nylonase. So I had a lot of viewers write in saying that they believed that nylonase was an increase in information in the genome in a bacteria. Well, first of all, let's explain what nylonase is. So there's this bacteria, see? And it lives in the wastewater of this factory, see? And there's a whole pile of nylon in the wastewater from this factory. Now, after a while, this bacteria undergoes a genetic change that allows it to digest nylon. This change is referred to as nylonase. Now, it's fascinating to be sure, but is it evolution in action? In short, no. Now, I've been referring to mistakes in the DNA as mutations. Now, unfortunately, the word mutation has actually meant just a change in the DNA, whether it's engineered by the organism or not. So, in the case of this rant, and in all my other rants, I will be referring to accidental changes as mutations, and deliberate changes, i.e., the bacteria re-engineers its DNA, as a change, not a mutation. We also got to clarify, because you see there's a huge difference between new information and borrowed information. Now, if you watched rant number 35, you know that I got 2 copies of my phone book, so I can provide this demonstration. Kids, don't try this at home, it really ticks off your parents. Now, I'm good friends with Xena, the warrior princess. I call her a lot on the telephone. Xena, baby, what you doing tonight?
Well, Gabrielle and I are here with the centaurs, and Dave now got a hold of the Exion
guess you won't have time to catch a movie then. I also call my good friend Captain Antagonator on the telephone a lot. Now, Xena is listed in the X section of the phone book, while Captain Antagonator is listed on the A section. So for convenience, because I call them both a lot, I rip out page X and place it up with page A. This is convenient for me most of the time because now I can look up A and X at the same time. However, it is a detrimental change to the telephone book because the alphabetical sequence is no longer there. It is also an example of borrowed information, not new information. Even if I rip out a page from another phone book and place it in this phone book, it is still an example of borrowed information, not new information. And so it is with the nylonase bacteria. It didn't actually produce any new parts, it used pre-existing parts and it modified them. It did this as a trade-off, as an expense to other systems in the bacteria. It took from those systems in order to modify the present pre-existing systems, in order to modify them to give them the ability to digest nylon. This was not new information. And if you put these bacteria back into a normal environment, they go back to the way they were, unable to digest nylon. That's because they borrowed information from other systems within the bacteria. It also appears that these bacteria did this deliberately. See, bacteria can swap DNA just by merely touching each other. Love you, man, but don't touch me. The bacteria can also apparently re-engineer their own DNA. In other words, bacteria were designed to re-engineer their own DNA. Programmers do this regularly. They design their programs with the ability to reprogram itself. They call this metaprogramming. It takes incredible intelligence and incredible design. So now, why would bacteria be designed with the ability to re-engineer their own DNA? Well, the answer is simple, really. You see, us humans, if we don't have food where we are, we can go elsewhere and forage for food.
Morning, welcome to Cincinnati Fritter, please.
Good morning. Could I get a blueberry fritter donut? Large coffee with 4 sugar, 2 cream. Bacteria, on the other hand, are microscopic and pretty much stuck wherever they are. So if they don't have their normal food, they now have the ability to re-engineer their DNA to give themselves the ability to digest whatever is at hand. Now this comes at a cost. They must do this at the expense of other systems within the bacteria. Furthermore, this has nothing to do with evolution. These are single-celled organisms. They can re-engineer their own DNA and swap DNA just by touching each other. Love you, man, but don't touch me. Multicellular organisms like plants, animals, fish, humans, we can't do this because our cells need to grow in unison. These bacteria, which have the supposed beneficial mutation, will allow it to be more successful than the less fit, unmutated bacteria. As a result, it will outgrow and outpopulate the less fit bacteria in a real big hurry. If you get a beneficial mutation like this in a multicellular organism, then the mutated cells will rapidly outpopulate and outgrow the other cells. Now, the medical community has a very long technical word for this. They call it a tumor. Tell me, is a tumor an increase in information in the genome? Do you think a tumor is a beneficial mutation? Is a tumor evolution in action? Is a tumor going to grant a person favor with natural selection? Nylonase isn't an example of evolution, nor is it an example of an increase in information. See rant number 41 for my definition of evolution. And if you want to read until your brain explodes, here's a really good paper on these supposed beneficial mutations. Join me next time to hear Captain Antagonator say... I believe my work here is complete. Now, in much the same way nylonase is not evidence for evolution, E. coli being produced in a lab which can digest citric acid is not evidence for evolution either. First of all, notice that E. coli were already capable of digesting citric acid when they were in a no-oxygen environment. So all the bacteria really did was make some changes that allowed it to digest nylon in an oxygenated environment. Now some asked why this change took so long. Well, the bacteria were kept in a medium already. They had plenty of food, and the citric acid was already there all along anyway. For example, the bacteria weren't first forced to digest the citric acid by removing all other food sources. Secondly, as Dr. Blount mentions in his interview with Science News, ancestors of E. coli and other bacteria may once have been able to eat citrate when oxygen is around, but E. coli lost the ability at least 13 million years ago, Blount says. Hold on a minute here. So even the researchers themselves suggested the bacteria already had this ability. They lost it and then regained it. This is not evolution, folks. Now, I like the way Ann Gauger put it on her post on the Biologic Institute's blog, which she entitled, Innovation or Renovation. Well put, Ann. That's exactly what it was. Simply a renovation of the DNA, not an innovation. Further on in the Science News article, author Tina Hesman-Say makes a crude comparison between the speed of evolution in these bacteria and humans. About a year in the lab, or 30,000 to 40,000 years worth of human evolution. Wait a minute. Bacterial changes have absolutely no bearing on changes in humans. As was mentioned in the rant, bacteria are single-celled organisms, whereas humans are multi-celled. Our multiple cells have to grow in unison. If one of those cells gains an innovation that gives it an advantage over the other cells like that, then that cell outgrows the others and becomes a tumor. This is not evolution. There is no bearing between this alleged evolution in bacteria and the evolution of higher organisms. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Funny, fast, and furious. Ian's Creo rants cover a multitude of topics in an easy-to-understand, comical way. Complicated subjects that normally make your brain hurt a lot less when Ian explains them, while wearing his anti-government mind-reading equipment. Have questions about carbon-14 dating, natural selection, thermodynamics, or what on earth is he doing there? 3 volumes of rants on DVD. Take your pick for $15 each, plus shipping and handling, or order all 3 as a package and save yourself $10. Order online today at Ian's Bookstore.
Woohoo! Mail for me? Thank you so much to those of you who wrote in. We've had so many excellent comments and questions. I wish I could read them all, but alas, I have to pick and choose. YouTuber Piper JK wrote in, you wonder how more chemicals can spring to life. This is a serious question, but just because you cannot think of an answer does not mean God did it. That's very weak. It is also dangerous. Using God did it has been invalidated by germ theory of disease and climatology for weather disasters like floods, for example. Except you forget something. When we are talking about the origin of life, please notice that I am calling upon what we do know, not what we do not know. We know that life only comes from life. It's a fact, a scientific and natural law. So by asking the question of how life arose from chemicals, you are literally asking how a miracle works. There is nothing dangerous or weak about pointing out well-established scientific and natural laws. I would dare say it is dangerous and weak to claim that we should try to find out how to violate scientific and natural laws. For example, even though we don't entirely understand how gravity works, gravity is the law. Don't try and violate it. That would be dangerous. Thomas from Minnesota wrote in, I saw a video of you on YouTube claiming you were a geocentrist. Is that true? He also was saying that your dinosaur eggs laid while running were, quote, impossible, and said the carbon-14 in dinosaur bones was contamination from the idiot who collected the carbon-14 samples and put shellac on them. Now, for those of you who do not know, a geocentrist is one who claims that the sun, planets, and stars are revolving around the Earth, and a heliocentrist is one who believes the Earth is rotating around the sun. Now, what I was saying was I was open to the possibility of geocentrism. The video in question was produced by an atheist who stopped in to visit the creation exhibition while I was set up in Toronto. I didn't know he was an atheist, and frankly at the time, it didn't matter. He was quite friendly and nice while he was there, and interviewed me and asked me questions about geocentrism. which is odd because I didn't talk about geocentrism anywhere in the exhibition. Of all the profound evidence I presented in Creation Exhibition, he homed in on a subject that I really didn't even care about. Now, when he got back to YouTube, that's when his true colors came out, and he started posting insulting comments on my videos. Now, while I would consider myself a heliocentrist, I had an encounter with a very knowledgeable geocentrist. I brought up all the arguments for heliocentrism that one would bring up, for which the geocentrist had an answer for every single point, including the arguments from gravity. Now, many of these responses I had never heard before, and so I would have to look into them some more. I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm saying that I was surprised by the answers I was given and would have to investigate more to come to my own conclusions about what I believe and why. I was simply keeping an open mind. Now, the thing is, YouTube critics are plentiful and usually only give condescending mockery. For example, apparently the video in question came from a YouTuber who posts a lot of videos with so many glaring errors and ignorance in them that it's difficult to know where to begin. He criticized Hugh Miller's work on carbon-14 in dinosaur bones, for example, claiming that the bones were contaminated by shellac. And besides the fact that this was a patently false statement, he betrays his utter ignorance in the matter. Carbon-14 is used primarily on archaeological finds. Well, these finds are buried in the ground or found in the rainforest and jungles, exposed to incredible amounts of carbon-14 contamination, including substances spilled on the samples that the collecting researchers would not even know about. That's why the lab technicians perform decontamination to remove substances containing modern carbon-14 from the samples. Now, obviously, this critic doesn't understand carbon-14 dating, nor did he understand thermodynamics, nor does he know anything about dinosaur eggs. Claiming my interpretation of the dinosaur eggs found in a row was impossible. The dinosaur eggs in question were found in a line like this, which is not a nest. Now, I interpreted it as the dinosaur dropping the eggs while on the move. The critic claiming this is impossible, again, shows his glaring ignorance on the matter, as animals and even humans are known to rapidly give birth or drop their eggs when threatened or under duress. Now, it would take too long to start to list the glaring errors and ignorance of these YouTube critics when their comments show they do not understand the science, nor the facts, and their best attack is mocking? Well, I think that speaks volumes. I have better things to do with my time than to waste it addressing nonsense touted on YouTube. Nevertheless, thanks for your specific questions, Thomas. Atheist TV wrote in, "Hi Ian, I just saw in a video that you're part of Core Ottawa. I'm curious to know what this is, where it's located, and how I can get more information. This website doesn't go anywhere. Thanks." Sure, thanks for writing in. If you hop on the Wayback Machine, you'll find the first snapshot of the coreottawa.ca website back in 2005, which says that Core was founded in 1990. We are an Ottawa-based charitable organization that seeks to educate others by fostering awareness of scientific facts which corroborate the biblical record of creation and the flood of Noah as described in Genesis. We achieve this purpose by inviting eminent scientists to the greater Ottawa Hull area to present the latest evidence for creation to churches, universities, high schools, and industrial research establishments. Our organized presentations take place 2 to 4 times a year at various locations. Now, back in 2008, I became the president of Core. However, shortly thereafter, one of the founders of Core, Barry Burkett, suggested that rather than bring speakers into the Ottawa area, Core should put their full backing behind myself, as I was already out in full-time creation ministry and fulfilling Core's mandate. Now, the board agreed, and so I became executive director and am now essentially the spokesperson for Core Ottawa, and Core now extends its reach across the country and around the world via the internet. My newsletter became Core's official newsletter, and Core sponsors the production of this show as the funds are available. Right now, rather than maintaining multiple websites, coreottawa.ca just simply redirects to my website. On that note, if you appreciate this show, it does cost money to keep this program on the air, and Canadians can support this program financially with a tax-deductible donation. As for our American viewers, I'm sorry, apparently Core cannot issue a tax-deductible receipt to you, but you can still support by a direct PayPal donation via my website here. A couple of shows back, I read 2 emails from 2 separate people asking about dating methods. Son of the Only Wise God wrote in, Dear Ian, you have dealt with the radiometric dating methods, but your criticisms are to certain examples. How do I know you're not cherry-picking? There is potassium argon, strontium rubidium, uranium lead, and many others. Are they all flawed, or just the ones you mentioned? There are methods that show that the Earth is very old, like sea salts in the ocean, star formation billions of years ago, and sedimentation rates. None of these support a 10,000-year-old Earth. Thanks for writing in. Actually, if you catch Creo rant number 100, you'll notice that the specific case examples I mentioned involved multiple radio dating methods. All of them disagreed with each other, and every single one of them were absolutely dead wrong because we knew the age of the rocks due to archaeology. Sea salts actually support a young Earth. Austin and Humphreys estimated some 450 million tons of sodium was being dumped into the world's oceans every year. Now, I have fossil stromatolites, which live in the ocean, in my museum collection that are claimed by evolutionists to be 3.4 billion years old. That's a lot of years, and that's a lot of salt. The amount of salt in our oceans shows the Earth is young. You can read more details here. Star formation is based on evolutionary assumptions, and all the evolutionary models of star formation have huge problems with them. Spike Pissaris' video series does an excellent job dealing with this matter. Polystrate fossils cutting through meters of rock layers show that sedimentation rates were catastrophic, not slow and gradual. Also, erosion rates of the continents is far too great for an Earth billions of years old. You can again see more details here. The bottom line is that using any of these clocks, you can get wildly varying estimates on the ages of the processes, most of which actually cause problems for an old Earth and deep time. Love your rants, keep doing what you're doing. We here in the northeast of England are loving it. Bless you. Well, we got to call that a wrap and cut out of here. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join us again next Genesis Week. You can send in your comments and questions a number of ways, such as email, send us a tweet, or post a comment on our most recent show on YouTube. Let us remember the words of care and warning from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me." We'll see you next week.
We need your support to help keep this program on the air. You can help by making a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K 2P4. You can also sign up for Ian's newsletter detailing current research and news items at ianjuby.org.